Horror is often underestimated and downplayed as just a surface level genre where the depth is limited to jump scares, ghosts, and scream queens. I find myself often drawn to horror because of its ability to entertain with the jump scares, brutality, and drama, but also because of its ability to explore more complicated hidden themes. With the recent craze of Squid Game, there's been a lot of conversation about its commentary on capitalism. What specifically interested me about Squid Game is its similarity to a lesser known movie called Would You Rather, and its similarities to other trends I've seen in horror in general. Specifically, I want to focus less on the series' commentary on political and economic structures of capitalism, but rather on the interpersonal dynamics between the poor and the rich, how the rich exploit the poor, why the poor make good victims, and the ethics associated with this exploitation. Let's start with Squid Game. Squid Game is a South Korean survival horror television series released on Netflix in 2021 and has become Netflix's most watched series. Squid Game follows a group of people living in Korea that are recruited to play this game. If they are able to make it through 6 games held over multiple days, they will win a large sum of money. As the contestants soon learn, the games are fatal. The first game is red light, green light. They can only move when it's a green light. If they're caught moving once the light turns red, they are eliminated. And they need to pass the finish line by the end of the time limit. It's not an option to not participate. After the first game, the contestants are given the opportunity to leave, and they do vote to leave the game, but most decide to come back since they're all in debt and need the money. They play childhood games like red light, green light, and tug of war, and in the end, out of 436 contestants, there is only one winner. The games are run by this group of elite, rich, old men who watch the games for fun. While I was watching Squid Game, it reminded me of a movie I watched a few years back called Would You Rather? Would You Rather is a 2012 American psychological horror thriller film. The game is really similar here. A group of poor people are invited to this rich man's mansion to play a game. The game starts out uncomfortable, but it's mostly psychological. They sit down to eat their steak dinner, but Iris is a vegetarian and declines to eat. She's offered $10,000 if she eats the steak, and she eventually accepts. Another attendee is a recovering alcoholic. He's offered $10,000 and eventually $50,000 until he is convinced to drink. At that point, they are offered the chance to leave, but they all stay. They officially start playing the game. As the title of the film suggests, the contestants play Would You Rather until there is one person left standing. These games are more Saw-like than the games in Squid Game. They choose between hurting or killing themselves or other people, and choosing between one torturous act and another to inflict on themselves. And before you say it, I'm not saying that Squid Game is copying Would You Rather. I doubt the creator of Squid Game has even seen Would You Rather, and it seems that the early version of Squid Game was written around the same time that Would You Rather was released, potentially even before the movie came out. I just thought it was interesting how coincidentally similar these two pieces of media are, and I was interested in looking at how these shared situations are different or the same, whether one situation could be considered more ethical than the other, and what this TV series and movie are trying to say about this pattern of rich people preying on the poor. The subjects of these games are the poor. They are targeted and bribed because of their financial situation. They might be desperate, they might need cash fast, or they might have nothing better to do. Many of them have already been through immense hardship, so what is this going to hurt? Both Squid Game and Would You Rather use the premise of a game as a way to lure the poor into the hands of the rich, as a way for the rich to do whatever they want to their victims, as a way to use their greatest weakness as justification to maim, torture, or kill them as entertainment for the rich. Squid Game delves deep into the background and personal lives of the main characters participating in the games. We grow attached to them and feel sympathy for their situations, just to be absolutely ripped to shreds when all but one of them dies. Squid Game spends a lot of time making sure the audience understands why these people are desperate enough to enter and re-enter the games. Gi-hun, player 456, is the main character of Squid Game. He was let go from his factory job 10 years before the start of the series and has been unable to find reliable work that can sustain his family since. He works occasionally as a chauffeur, but seems to spend what little money he does have on gambling and has amassed debt with banks and loan sharks. He is also growing distant from his daughter, who lives with his ex-wife. Their family will be moving to America, where their relationship will become even more distant and potentially even fade completely. In episode 2, when he comes back from the games, he realizes his situation is even worse than it was before. His mother is sick, and they have no insurance to pay for her medical treatments. Cho Sang-woo, player 218, is gi-hun's childhood friend. He had this reputation of being the successful one. He went to college and is now a big businessman, but he actually has accumulated a lot of debt and is wanted by the police for stealing from his clients. Kang sae-byeok, player 67, escaped from North Korea with her little brother. She's been saving up money to be able to pay for her parents to be brought to South Korea. But she was scammed and her money was stolen by these people that were supposed to be helping her get her parents to safety. Abdul Ali, player 199, is an immigrant from Pakistan. He works to support his wife and young child, but his boss has been withholding pay from him for months. Would You Rather is a 90-minute movie and has less time to spend on each of the contestants' backstories, but from what we know of them, they're all in similar situations as the contestants in Squid Game. The main character, Iris, takes care of her younger brother. She's unable to pay for his cancer treatments. Other contestants include a paralyzed elderly woman, a war veteran, and a gambling addict. The most beloved main characters in Squid Game are shown to be victims of circumstance. They've done nothing wrong to deserve their placement in society. Sae-byeok can't control the fact that she was born in North Korea, and she was scammed out of her money that was to be used to help her parents. Similarly, Ali immigrated from Pakistan, and his boss doesn't pay him. These two characters are perhaps the most tragic because it never feels like they deserve their endings. They were just trying to provide for their families, despite their unlucky situations. The villains are shown to have earned their place at the bottom of society. They've dug themselves into a poverty hole. Jang Dok-soo is the villain from the start. He is in debt because he stole money from his boss and his employees, and because he is a gambling addict. And Sang-woo is revealed to be a villain, or becomes one over time. He is in debt because of bad investments, which was spent with stolen money from his clients. Perhaps this should have foreshadowed the direction his character would go over the course of the series, as he goes from ally to sabotager to outright enemy. Some characters are a critique of capitalism in general. Under capitalism, a person's worth is defined by their labor potential. Il-nam, before we learn who he really is deemed worthless because he is old, he isn't strong physically or mentally, he isn't worth much in the games or out in the real world. Similarly, Would You Rather features a paralyzed elderly woman and a war veteran. A paralyzed elderly woman isn't able to contribute physical labor to a business, which makes her less desirable and again less worthy in this type of society. War veterans who suffer injuries and mental disorders such as PTSD are often not hired because they can be seen as a liability or as difficult, so again, this is another type of person that is less desirable and seen as unworthy. It's upsetting that these characters would put themselves in this position to be a contestant in a game like Would You Rather, but under capitalism, it's unavoidable. The explanation behind each character's poverty is an indication of whether we're supposed to root for them. Ali and sae-byeok were victims of circumstance, therefore they are the good characters. Sang-woo and Dok-soo are the gambling addicts and thieves and are therefore the villains. It makes it easier to root for Ali and sae-byeok knowing that they aren't bad people who scam and thieve and then waste money in bad investments, but it also makes me question why we're only allowed to care for people that are designated worthy of our compassion. In this universe, it's almost like we're not supposed to care for people that have gambling addictions, for example. People aren't allowed to make mistakes. But then, the main character, Gi-hun calls this theory into question. He is more of an anti-hero. Main characters are usually these charismatic, courageous good guys, but Gi-hun is a bit of a slimeball at times, which makes him a really interesting main character. When the players are first brought to their holding cell, Dok-soo, the main villain of the series, gets in a fight with sae-byeok. They had worked together in the past, and she had scammed him, and he's mad and yells at her and starts physically fighting her. A crowd of players gathers around them watching them fight, and then Gi-hun steps in and you think he's going to break up the fight, but he actually comes after sae-byeok as well, starts grabbing her and asking why she stole from him, or how in episode 2, Gi-hun and sae-byeok are dropped off and he asks her to untie him, and he swears on his mother's life that he won't harass sae-byeok about the money again, but as soon as she unties him, he immediately brings it up again. He's not the most chivalrous, honest, smart guy. There is a divide between the good guys and the bad guys. The divide is dictated by how they became poor. Gi-hun straddles this line. He was laid off from his job suddenly, which isn't a situation he could have helped, but then it's hard to have sympathy for him as we see him sneak money from the family credit card and spend money so recklessly on gambling. He has these shady moments, but we see how underneath it all he is a good person. We see how he cares about his mother and his daughter, how he cares for Il-nam, how he cares for human life in general. Over time, as the games go on, Gi-hun grows more confident in his beliefs and morals. He becomes protective of sae-byeok and becomes unrelenting about the importance of human life. Even in the beginning, Gi-hun had been an advocate against the games, prompting the first vote. And when it's down to just him and Sang-woo, and he is steps away from victory, he would rather stop the game than have his friend die. Gi-hun has an upwards trajectory in comparison to Iris's development in Would You Rather. Most of the contestants in Would You Rather start out selfless, not wanting to inflict pain on others, but as the game goes on, everyone starts playing only for themselves. Iris's final test is similar to Gi-hun's. Iris's final test is to kill either herself or Lucas, the other player, a player who she is bonded with over the course of the game. She chooses to kill him. The situations are slightly different between Squid Game and Would You Rather. Iris has to kill or be killed. Gi-hun would just be stopping the game and not winning the money. Iris is also tasked with killing a stranger she only met a few hours ago. Gi-hun would need to let his childhood friend die. But these character arcs portray opposing messages. Gi-hun's decisions show a more optimistic outlook on human behavior, that compassion can win out even in the face of impossible outcomes. He also shows this optimism about humanity in his final discussions with Il-nam and how he decides to go back to stop the games. Iris's arc shows her being more and more broken down until she does the inevitable and expected, killing the other player. Iris's final game decision makes her fate painfully ironic. After she wins the game, she goes back to her house and finds that her brother has killed himself, meaning that the games were pointless. She doesn't need the host to arrange a bone marrow donor for her brother. She doesn't need all this money for expensive cancer treatments. Her fate is almost a punishment for selling her soul, killing another person, losing her humanity. It's laughing in her face. Gi-hun's post-game situation is similar. He wins the games and comes home to find his mother dead. Again, not needing money for her medical treatments, which was the final straw that made him re-enter the games. Gi-hun did everything right in the game, but was still punished in the end. His mother's death is an added atrocity onto his already extensive trauma and loss. Gi-hun entered the games wanting to provide for his mother, and even though he played the game as ethically as possible, he is still punished by these outside forces. All of these horror movies show bad things. Let's make that clear. There's no situation where it's justified to kill people, but it is interesting to examine the nuances at play with something like Squid Game and Would You Rather versus something like Hostel and Saw. There are two components that I think are relevant that factor into how ethical the games are, how the victims are sourced, and whether the victims give consent. At first, it seems like either of these games, the Squid Games or Would You Rather, would be more ethical than something like Hostel, since there is an element of consent given. In Hostel, any random tourist is selected to be a victim. In Saw, Jigsaw captures people according to his belief system. Yes, that belief system is flawed, but at least there is some reason to it. Theoretically, as long as you are a good person, you wouldn't be targeted by Jigsaw. But in Would You Rather and Squid Game, the victim's only crime is that they are poor. Their debt is used as justification to slaughter and torture them. In Hostel and Saw, there is no consent. They are drugged and kidnapped and forced into these brutal situations, either because of random circumstances, like in Hostel, or because they may have cheated on their significant other, like in Saw. In Squid Game and Would You Rather, the contestants do consent to participate in the games. While watching Squid Game, I drew an instant comparison to these other horror movies and initially thought Squid Game isn't as bad in comparison, even when compared to Would You Rather. In Would You Rather, the contestants agree to participate in the game before they know their lives are on the line. Once they find out the game is a matter of life and death, there is no getting out of it. The Would You Rather contestants give their consent, but it is uninformed. Yes, they could have probably guessed there was something sketchy about to go down, but they didn't fully know what was in store. But in Squid Game, they are given the opportunity to leave, and they do vote to end the game, but most of them decide to re-enter the game. The Squid Game contestants give their informed consent, but it is coerced. At first, Squid Game seemed more ethical than other similar horror movie games. Here, contestants give their informed consent to partake in this fatal game. They even sign a contract. This gives the illusion of consent. It's in a sterile environment, legal and by the books, but is this contract any more legitimate and consensual than the contract Gi-hun signs in the first episode? In the first episode, Gi-hun signs a contract at knife point by loan sharks. While the Squid Game participants don't sign their contracts by physical threat, there is another looming threat constantly in their heads. If they don't sign the contract and participate in the games, they will be killed by loan sharks in the outside world when they can't pay them back. They will be forced to watch their family members die of cancer, unable to pay for medical treatments. There isn't much of a choice for them. Their consent to participate is manipulated by their financial standing. And this gives Ilnam and the Squid Game VIPs leeway, legally and ethically. They can say that they gave contestants multiple opportunities to back out of the games. They can say that contestants are able to make their own decisions about whether they want to participate. If they thought hard enough about it, though, they would realize that the consent is not as clear-cut as they thought. What kind of situation must these people be in? How desperate are they, if they would be willing to put their lives on the line like this? I think the VIP's limited view on consent gives them room to feel like they did their due diligence in ethically sourcing this pool of victims, and they are covered legally, at least somewhat. In episode 2, the contestants vote to end the game and are released back home. Gi-hun immediately reports this to the police, and they laugh in his face. They ask him, "You agreed to go to the game in the first place, and you signed a contract agreeing to play the game, and then they let you go when you asked." It doesn't sound like a non-consensual kidnapping torture ring at first glance, without having a more nuanced view on consent.
피해자들이 우리 나가고 싶어요 했더니 살인자들이 그래요 나가세요라고 했다.
예.
The contestants are all chosen because of their vulnerability, which is the very factor that also makes their consent questionable. These contestants are selected because they have massive debts to pay, or they need money for medical treatments, or helping their family in some other way. In both Squid Game and Would You Rather, the hosts attempt to win over the contestants and gain their trust by showing that they will give them the money in the end. In Would You Rather, they play the relatively tame version of the game where the host makes Iris, a vegetarian, eat meat. In Squid Game, they play a game of dokji, which leads to their recruitment. These are both used as tactics to show that the hosts are good on their word and that the money will be awarded when the contestants win the game. Both of these initial games are also important in showing how desperate the contestants are, how willing they are to degrade themselves, which would surely make for a more entertaining competitive game. In Would You Rather, they test them to make sure that a vegetarian will eat meat, that a recovering alcoholic will drink alcohol, just so the host can laugh at them, at how desperate they are for the money, at how willing they are to sell their morals and ideals. In Squid Game, the Dokji game, and the Squid Game as a whole, preys on gamblers like Gi-hun who are more likely to attempt this challenge and bet with their lives. But the Dokji game also explores how willing these people are to degrade themselves. The recruiter and potential contestant take turns seeing who can flip over the other's paper. Whoever wins will pay the other money. It's obviously kind of a scam since the recruiter is really good at the game, and it takes a while for the potential contestant to win. When we watch Gi-hun play the game, he loses the first round and tells the recruiter that he doesn't have money to pay him. And the recruiter says he can pay by getting slapped in the face. We see endless rounds of him losing and getting slapped in a public subway station. This is a test to see how willing contestants are to degrade and embarrass themselves, how willing they are to do whatever it takes to win. It's essentially a test to see how vulnerable and desperate these people are, which makes the ethics of the games extremely sketchy, and their vulnerability and desperation makes them also willing to re-enter the games the second time around. Squid Game shows a more nuanced view of good and bad people. I think there is an assumption, or at least a hope, that good things happen to good people, that homeless people or poor people in general must have done bad things to get themselves in that position. Squid Game shows that your worth as a person isn't dictated by how much money you have. On the contestant side, there are good and bad people, and characters in the middle, like Gi-hun. The VIPs are so desensitized because of their money, which allows them to buy whatever they want, so now the only thing that will entertain them is this demented sport. Gambling is a specific vice that is targeted in the series. Gi-hun and Dok-soo are both gamblers, which has helped them accumulate a large amount of debt. Gambling and other addictions, such as alcoholism, are harmful vices that are often downplayed by onlookers because it's seen as an active choice rather than a disorder or disease. So people addicted to gambling often have this negative association or stereotype. But the VIPs are also gamblers. As Ilnam says, Gi-hun bets on horses, the VIPs bet on people. And I would argue that the VIPs are just as addicted to gambling. When they spend billions of dollars between the few of them over multiple games on this extremely risky activity that only lasts a few days each time. And the fact that the show highlights how each of these two groups have a propensity for gambling works to eliminate the bias, stereotype, and connotation towards gambling. It shows that the breed of people that gamble aren't a monolith. A predisposition towards gambling doesn't dictate whether someone is a good or bad person, or even whether someone is rich or poor or good at money management. The only difference between the VIPs and Gi-hun in regard to gambling is that the VIPs have money, which makes their gambling addiction not shameful. These pieces of media also emphasize the flaws of a society where people are desperate enough to play a game where the bet is their lives. A society where people are this desperate to get money to pay for basic necessities like healthcare. A society where rich people can play with these people like pawns in a quick round of chess. A society that has an economic gap that is so wide where the rich can spend millions and billions of dollars on a hobby, and where the poor have no assets to their names other than their lives and their dignity, their last belongings snatched away by the rich for entertainment. And I think that's what makes Squid Game and Would You Rather so scary, is because of how relatable the victims' situations are. While watching Hostel and Saw, you can detach yourself from the movie. You can tell yourself that you would never be in that situation. I'm never going to stay at a sketchy hostel in a foreign country. I'm not a police officer that accepted a bribe. Squid Game and Would You Rather are more relatable because the victims are just like us. A huge portion of the population is able to relate to being so hopelessly poor that you can't even afford necessities like healthcare or food or housing. And if you're in this situation, it makes it more likely that you could see yourself as a victim in Squid Game and Would You Rather. You are one of 456 contestants desperate for a chance to improve your family's life. And if you're not desperate enough to join the games, You're potentially only one accident away from being in that situation. All it takes is one car accident, being laid off from a job, one cancer diagnosis, and all your financial stability can be stripped away. When people are desperate for money, the only thing they have left is their dignity, and that becomes their bargaining chip. In Squid Game and Would You Rather, these poor people are targeted because they have nothing left to give. They can't really afford to keep their dignity. They would do anything to survive. And this can be connected to real-world activities as well. People are judgmental and disgusted with the idea of people resorting to sex work, for example. Some people may choose this career path, and some are physically forced into it, but there are some people that go into sex work as a last resort. There's a lot of stigma that is placed on sex workers that contributes to it being a difficult career path to willingly choose, but some people are forced into it in the sense that they need to do sex work to survive, to make money for their family so they don't have to live on the streets. This idea of poor people being targeted is explored in other horror films. The Purge series is one example of this. The Purge is about a dystopian world where crime is allowed and legal on one day of the year, in an effort to decrease crime rates during the other 364 days. The rich people are able to lock up in their fancy houses with their fancy security systems during the Purge, while poor people are unable to secure their homes and belongings or family, and homeless people are left with nowhere to go and would be more at risk of being harmed. The first film follows a rich family locked down in their house. The second film, The Purge Anarchy, follows a few different storylines, including a poor family where the old grandpa sells himself to be hunted by a group of rich people. Hostel, while not targeting poor people specifically, also features a club of rich people that pays to harm people. Horror films and art in general are able to reflect on what's important during the era that it's made, are able to comment on what's going on in society. It's safe to say that common concerns and fears these days are based in inequality in financial status as highlighted by these pieces of media specifically, and how this inequality can create a power imbalance that makes us desperate to improve our place in society. How as the middle class dwindles and the gap between the 99 and 1% widens, we will be at the mercy of the rich, and can maybe be in a Squid Game of our own one day. That's it for my commentary on how the horror genre exploits the poor. I hope that you were able to take something away from this video. I'm still working on my analysis skills, but I was just really interested in breaking down some of the differences between Squid Game and Would You Rather. I don't think Would You Rather is a super well-known movie, but I was just kind of shocked that I didn't see anyone else drawing any comparison to it, especially when Squid Game is so popular right now and everyone's talking about it. And I don't think Squid Game is perfect. I definitely think there are some plot holes, some things that didn't feel intentional, some twists that were thrown in there just to be entertaining. But I did really like it, and I grew really attached to the characters and was just down for the ride. And same thing with Would You Rather. It's mostly just a torture porn kind of movie, but I just thought it was interesting to compare the similarities and differences between Squid Game and Would You Rather, and I just wanted to comment on that. So that's it. Thanks for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!